Welcome back to Eclectic Beard Gaming Reactions. This is another video on Cyberpunk 2077. This game, depending on who you ask, is either complete butt or it's really good despite its flaws. And there's really no in between. I'm going to give my opinion on some things I've seen in the game at this point. No, I have not played all the way through. I'm taking my time. Like, I've got 70 hours in and I'm level 25, so yeah, definitely taking my time. I'm doing gigs, side missions, to side missions, off to side missions, doing a little bit of everything. Because apparently in this game, you know, word of mouth doesn't just apply to handyman services. So this game has garnered a lot of heat, and I mean like a lot. Some of it rightfully so. I think at least in terms of the specs required to run the game, especially where last-gen consoles are concerned, they greatly missed the mark. A lot of folks want to excoriate them for graphical fidelity, crashes, and bugs on the PS4 and Xbox One. I really can't blame them on that. If I was to buy the game for either one of those systems and I have the problems that they've had, I'd be furious, to be honest with you. I was actually worried when I heard the game map was going to be not as big as a Witcher 3, but its size would be vertical, meaning there's going to be a lot of buildings. Like, a lot of buildings. Because if it's vertical, that's exactly what that is. It's a lot of buildings, and looks like I was at least partially right in that. It's one thing to have regular neighborhoods with like 2-story and 1-story houses, and you've got like a city center with like shops and high rises and stuff like that. And it goes back to a regular neighborhood and even wide open places like it does on GTA 5. However, you take an ad's just building upon building upon building upon building upon building upon building, which in other games would count as high rises, and you have the ability to go into them. City level is even multiple levels. You're going to run into issues. Add in population density, and yes, games like GTA 5, The Witcher, they've all had places, they've all got spots where there's lots of buildings and there's lots of people. But when the whole game is big buildings, lots of people, because there's very few areas of this game, unless you go north side, unless you go out to the Badlands. Not really a whole lot of areas in this game where you don't have large buildings, lots of people. Large buildings, 3/4 of the map, large buildings, lots of people. The majority of the game takes place. Large buildings, lots of people. You get into graphical fidelity problems at that point if you don't have the hardware to push it. That was my concern with the PS4 and Xbox One, because granted, they play amazing games. However, instead of having a map that's expanded out, where you've got a couple of clusters of places, where you've got a lot of population, and you've got a lot of, you got a good amount of buildings. For them to only be in those certain spots, though, it's easier for those spots, graphically speaking, to turn out looking really nice without that much issue than it is to have the whole map look like those city centers with the high rises spread out across 3/4 of your map. Add in the population. You're graphically speaking, and even computational, the CPUs and the GPU of a PC is going to be taxed if it doesn't have, if it's not a good setup. If you don't have at least, in my opinion, at least 4 cores with 8 threads, so that way you've got that extra core count, you're going to run into issues. Now, granted, both the Xbox and PS4 both have 8 cores, and their GPUs have been awesome. But it's still older hardware. These things come out at a time when the i5 4750 series was like that. Whenever the i5 4000 series, the i3 4000, the i7 4000 series, and AMD was still on their they weren't even at the FX yet. They were still on AMD Athlon. You take a look at the minimum required specs, and it's i5 4790K, and it's a GTX 760. That's for low settings. Minimum recommended specs for that's low 1080. Something tells me you're going into your menu to actually make it to where it's like very low, like 20 to 30, maybe 40 FPS. So that being the case, I was worried looking at the minimum specs and be like, oh, I'm gonna run this on the Xbox One and stuff. Oh, okay. I was worried. Rightfully so, apparently. Not saying that it can't be cleaned up. I just don't think it should have been released for those systems. I think it should have been released for PS4 Pro, Xbox One X, and then new gen along with PC. I think they'll finally get the graphical fidelity to where it's acceptable. I don't think you're going to get anywhere close to what you see on the new gen or the PC, which, in my opinion, if you're playing on PS4 and Xbox and it doesn't look as good as it does on, it's different than playing GTA 5 on your Xbox One or your PS4 and then playing it on PC. PC might look a little bit prettier, but the main thing is you're going to get a lot higher frame rates when you're locked in at 30 on your console. So if I can't take and get the frame rates and I want the prettiness, which happens with some games, you get the prettiness, you're just locked into 30. You're not going to get either one of those on this. You're at 30 FPS, you're not going to get the graphical fidelity. I don't think it should have been released whatsoever on the last gen consoles. The other problem is the obfuscation by the CEO on the last gen performance, and the after the fact apology. It feels more like he was asking for forgiveness before he asked for permission. It's that kind of deal is what it feels like to me. But the problem is that and the launch of this game has tarnished the reputation of CD Projekt Red. They're going to be having to work overtime with patches and then providing excellent expansions as DLC, and they're gonna have to knock it out the park with the multiplayer mode, because as it stands right now, you've got players like me. I'm enjoying the game. I've spent a ton of time in it. Love the game. I have some issues outside of the nuts and bolts of the game, but I'll get into that later. You got others, so there's a lot of players like me who are giving them the benefit of the doubt, waiting to see how things play out, waiting to see the DLC that comes, how much more it adds to the enjoyment of the game, what they might add to it. And then you've got those players who have broken trust but are still playing it. They're like, okay, well, let's see what you can do. And then you've got those other gamers who they've lost their trust completely, and who will never buy anything the CD Projekt Red ever does again because they feel like they've been lied to, and if they've done it once, why won't they do it again? That's an issue, because that's part of your player base that you're not going to get back. So now you have to look at word of mouth after the patches and the DLC to bring new people on who are slow adopters or who decided to wait. So if they lose some of the people like myself and some of those who have the broken trust, they're going to be in big trouble, because if you think about it, The Witcher 3 came out in 2015. Blood and Wine, the last expansion, was released in 2016. So that's 4 years putting resources into a game that they then hype via commercials, a YouTube channel. They get Keanu Reeves to not only they do all of the bodysuit stuff where they take and do the motion capture, but also the voiceover. They get Run the Jewels and other artists to take and do tracks exclusive for the soundtrack for the game, only to have it soured the way it has. That's an issue. Their stock took a hit, and they've had so many people actually getting refunds for the game. So yeah, they're gonna have to, how they proceed at this point, pretty much it's going to tell the tale, because it's paramount to them regaining that lost trust and faith the gaming public in general. If the patches come out and they smooth everything over and the DLC is just killer and they add some things for players to do outside of the missions and the gigs and things like that, if they make it to where instead of having one of two joy toys to go to, or races or fights, where you've got something like pinball or steam baths or casino or something to take and give a level of depth to the game that at the moment it kind of lacks because you have no way of unwinding. Granted, you're kind of on a biological clock, so to speak, due to the shard that's in your head, but still, you don't really have any way for your character to unwind other than the two joy toys. So they've got to take and do something with that. If the multiplayer is done right, which it'd be nice to see, giving players options to work their way up to being the fixers instead of getting the gigs from fixers, work their way up to being fixers, having an in-game economy that's predicated on trading and crafting, kind of like you see in some MMOs where there's a board or even a computer that you can go to where you, after you've crafted something or you find something in-game that another player might want, you can put it up and you get the in-game credits. Allowing players to form factions. That way, instead of just like the Tiger Claws and Voodoo Boys and stuff like that, player created factions, gangs, pretty much hierarchies, basically clans in other games. Or even have the ability to band together to either do jobs or prevent other players from completing jobs or missions. That would be nice to see. How they go forward is paramount, I think, to their continued success as a company. Because you can make a lot of good games. One game can sink a company. One game, if it goes wrong, and as much money and time and effort that's been put in this game, it could. You'll see further stock slippage. You'd wind up seeing firings at the top, and it just would not be good. And whatever comes around after, if things aren't done right, really isn't going to do them any favors. People aren't going to trust it. So they can't afford to foul things up any further than they already have. And those are just my thoughts on what's happened so far with Cyberpunk 2077. Y'all be good to each other. Love yourselves.